Edgar Cayce, an outstanding prophet, was born on March the 18th, 1877, in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, USA. During his childhood, Cayce lived a typical 19th century farmhouse life with a strong religious atmosphere. Generations of his family lived together. When he was 6 or 7 years old, Cayce told his parents that he could see deceased relatives and talk with them. However, his family didn't take these words seriously. From a young age, Cayce began to read the Bible, going through it from cover to cover every year. Cayce could fall asleep on any book and, upon waking up, remember and recite the entire contents fluently, even if the content and vocabulary far exceeded his knowledge. This left his family confused. However, as Cayce grew older, this ability gradually faded away. When he was a child, he had an extraordinary memory, being able to memorize an entire book after sleeping on it. He had this ability. It wasn't until he reached adulthood that he really discovered his special reading ability under hypnosis. At the age of 20, he got engaged. At that time, Cayce aspired to become a photographer, but he couldn't. To make a living, he found a job in the insurance industry and sold stationery on the side. During this period, a life-changing incident occurred. Cayce suffered from chronic laryngitis, which worsened over time to the point that he couldn't even speak normally. All the doctors couldn't do anything about it, and even Cayce himself felt hopeless about ever recovering his voice. This condition persisted for a year. During this period, an actor who had experienced remarkable results with hypnosis used hypnotherapy to help Cayce. Despite lacking medical knowledge, this person, after hypnotizing Cayce, suggested him to restore his normal voice. Miraculously, Cayce, under hypnosis, could respond with a completely normal voice. However, upon waking up, the laryngitis returned. Later, a local man named Lane, after learning about Cayce's situation, considered making further attempts. After hypnotizing Cayce, he inquired him about his ailment. This time, Cayce's talent finally came into play. Just like sleeping on textbooks when he was a child, Cayce put himself to sleep. After Cayce fell asleep, Lane asked the sleeping Cayce about his ailment. Clearly, he wasn't actually asleep, as he could communicate. Cayce, in a normal and clear voice, told Lane and others around him that his ailment was rooted in psychological factors and guided them to treat it. Following Cayce's instructions, Lane directed Cayce's blood to concentrate on the affected area. After a while, those around saw Cayce's upper chest and throat gradually turning pink, then rose, then a violent red. The skin in the affected area began to heat up. The temperature was very high. After some time, following Cayce's guidance, Lane suggested the blood flow to return to normal. Cayce woke up, with his voice completely recovered. This was his first hypnotic reading on March the 11th, 1901. When Cayce was under hypnosis, Lane suggested what he should do. Since Cayce had strong concentration at that time, he abode in that state. The blood in his throat area heated up, and the blood flow accelerated. Hence, his laryngitis was completely cured in a short time. Later, at Lane's repeated requests, Cayce used readings to provide a comprehensive treatment plan that miraculously cured Lane's long-standing stomachache. After that, he provided a reading for a little girl with delayed intellectual development and found it was caused by trauma. The doctor took the advice of the sleeping Cayce and gradually helped the girl recover to normal. The sleeping Cayce, despite lacking medical knowledge, could accomplish things that he couldn't do when awake, such as diagnosing illnesses. This amazed and excited those around him, but Cayce himself was deeply confused and distressed. His life began to change greatly. Cayce initially wanted to be a photographer and live an ordinary life, but his reading ability clearly determined that he couldn't live an ordinary life. Of course, Cayce himself had no idea where his ability came from or how it worked. He could only seek answers from his faith. Cayce turned to the Bible for guidance, prayed, and also discussed with his family. In the end, he decided to continue using his special ability with the condition that he wouldn't use it to harm others. Additionally, Cayce eventually became a professional photographer, and life reading was just his hobby. In 1903, Cayce got married and began family life. Regarding Cayce's ability, the New York Times once featured a special report on October the 9th, 1910, with the title, "Illiterate Man Becomes a Doctor When Hypnotized." In no time, Cayce became very popular, with countless people in letters applying for his readings. After the publication of the report, many people came for consultations. Despite the fame and trust from others, Cayce's views on his readings didn't change until two incidents occurred. The first was in 1911, when Cayce's second son was born. Shortly after birth, the child fell ill, and the doctors couldn't do anything about it. Only when the doctors had completely given up hope did Cayce agree to try his reading. Unfortunately, he couldn't save his own child this time. Misfortunes never come singly. Cayce's wife also fell ill, and her condition was getting worse. The doctor privately informed Cayce that his wife had contracted tuberculosis, a disease considered incurable at that time. In this dire situation, Cayce conducted a reading for his wife. The sleeping Cayce prescribed a comprehensive remedy which doctors considered useless. However, after taking the medicine for only 2 days, his wife's fever subsided, and several months later, she completely recovered. As more and more people applied for readings, Cayce began to consider building a hospital for this. However, while looking for partners, Cayce learned a lesson that all of us should bear in mind. An oil company in Texas became interested in Cayce and proposed a seemingly reciprocal partnership. Cayce would help them find oil fields, and they would sponsor Cayce's hospital. However, this time, Cayce's attempts to find oil fields through his readings repeatedly failed. The oil company's goal was profit. They were not truly interested in building a hospital. As a result, their partnership ended. Hence, Cayce realized that his ability should not be used to seek commercial gains. Until 1923, Cayce's readings were limited to medical matters. He had no idea that a completely unfamiliar field was unfolding to him and would deeply influence his faith. As Cayce's psychic abilities increased, his reputation soared. Meanwhile, it also attracted many skeptics. Many people specifically came to Virginia Beach City in hopes of exposing Cayce's tricks. However, most of their hopes diminished, and some even became Cayce's believers and applied for his readings. A devout Catholic writer, Thomas Segru, came with the intention of exposing Cayce's tricks. However, in the end, he wrote the first biography about Cayce titled There Is a River, published in 1943. The most popular magazine at that time, Coronet, sent a journalist named Harmon Brough to investigate. Her article, Miracle Man of Virginia Beach, made Cayce more famous. What's more, her son, Harmon Hartzell Brough, wrote his doctoral thesis at the University of Chicago in 1955, based on the life and work of Cayce. There are many books about Cayce, among which a representative one is Many Mansions, written by Gina Cerminara, published in 1950. This book can be considered an important reference in Western research on reincarnation. In fact, it also took a significant process for Cayce himself to accept reincarnation. Once, while conducting a reading for a man from Ohio, Cayce said, "This person was a monk in his past life." This time, Cayce felt confused again, because the existence of past lives implies the existence of reincarnation. However, as a Christian, this concept was very unfamiliar to him. Cayce began to pray and sought to read this puzzle. The answer he received was to read the Bible from beginning to end. That is, he asked, "What is reincarnation?" And he answered himself in a hypnotic state, "Read the Bible from beginning to end." This is because only in a hypnotic state could he find a correct answer. The meaning of the Bible emerged in his mind, urging Cayce to pay attention to the significance and commonality of all lives. By reading the Bible carefully from beginning to end, Cayce finally found that the concept of reincarnation did not conflict with Christianity. Besides, it also aligned with his understanding of what it means to be a Christian. Later, Cayce gave up his photographer job and began to build his hospital. He accepted donations, but meanwhile never refused to provide readings for those who are too poor to pay. In other words, if the patient couldn't afford to pay, he would still provide readings for them. If the patient could afford to pay, he would also accept their donations. In his later years, Cayce's ability became even greater. He could even know something without entering the sleeping state. Once he came out of the room, sadly, because he knew that 3 young soldiers would never return. He began to see auras around all living things. Gradually, this ability grew, and he could even tell a person's emotions and health through these auras. After the outbreak of World War II, Cayce received more and more letters from all over the US, mostly inquiring about the safety of their loved ones, as the soldiers' families were anxious. During this period, Cayce sometimes had to provide 8 readings in a day, even though he was aware from his readings that this work shouldn't exceed twice a day, as it would be exhausting. In the spring of 1944, Cayce's health began to deteriorate, and the messages from the readings indicated that he should pause. However, the request for readings kept pouring in, and Cayce fell ill. By the end of the year, Cayce gave himself a reading and told his anxious family and friends, after the new year, everything will be fine. Later, they realized what he truly meant. On January the 3rd, 1945, Cayce passed away. In the same year, on Easter, his wife also passed away. Above is some brief information about Cayce. He later reinterpreted the Bible and believed that reincarnation was not in conflict with Christianity or the Bible. The following is his own viewpoint. Cayce's readings are not limited to those he personally knows. They can be complete strangers from anywhere on earth. By simply knowing their full name, date of birth, and location, Cayce can accurately describe their surroundings, temperaments, abilities, strengths, weaknesses, and even trace their past lives and provide insights and predictions about their future. Many people in China have this ability. Cayce himself revealed that he had been a high priest in Egypt many centuries ago who had great supernatural powers. However, self-will and sensuality led him to decline. Cayce believed that the virtues and flaws of his current life could be traced back to experiences in his past lives. He had completely believed in the concept of reincarnation. The present life was a test for his soul, providing him with an opportunity to serve others selflessly so that he could redeem the pride, materialism, and sensuality in his past lives. Cayce's extensive past life readings also confirmed the concepts of karma and reincarnation in ancient Chinese culture.